Welcome everyone. Before we dive into building amazing things in AWS, let's talk about security. Let's begin with AWS IAM. First, we discuss about the topics that we cover under this service. First, what is IAM? Second, IAM users, groups, roles and policies. Then overview of access management, policies and permissions. How to read IAM policy, hands-on. Create first IAM user using AWS console. Create first IAM group using AWS console. Attach policies to the group. Test the access of new user to AWS console. AWS access key, AWS CLI and SDK. Guys, the most important point, hands-on based on real-world scenario. AWS Cloud Shell. What is AWS IAM best practices? Guys, what is IAM? The most important question. So IAM stands for Identity and Access Management. Basically, IAM is who can access which AWS resources is decided by IAM service. Here resource can be S3, Lambda, EC2, etc. So this is the exact definition of IAM. Actually guys, AWS IAM is like a security guard for your AWS account. It controls who can access your AWS resources and what exactly they are allowed to do with them. So think of it as giving out different types of ID cards. Some people get full access, others can only view things, and some might only access specific areas. IAM service securely control access to your AWS resources. It controls authentication and authorization. Guys, we have hands-on on authentication and authorization. But for now, authentication means who can access the AWS resources, and authorization means what they can do. IAM authorize the identity for a particular services or resources. So it means after authentication, user enters the AWS account, and after authorization, they can access particular resource and perform different operations. Now, what is IAM in AWS? You want to access AWS. Alright. Now, will you need IAM which help you access the AWS resources? Now, there are a number of AWS resources possible. For example, your EC2, your S3, your Lambda. In AWS, a resource is an entity that you can work with. Example include an Amazon EC2 instance and Amazon S3 bucket. With IAM, you can centrally manage permissions that control which AWS resources users can access. You use IAM to control who is authenticated, means signed in, and authorized, means has permissions to use resources. Now, basic definition of authentication and authorization. In the authentication process, the identity of user is checked for providing the access to the system, whereas authorization process, a person's or user's authorities are checked for accessing the resources. Authentication is done before the authorization process, or you can say the authorization process is done after the authentication process. Authentication and authorization in AWS. A principal must be authenticated. It means signed into AWS using their credentials. Then credentials means username, your password to send a request to AWS. Authentication can be done using AWS console or command line interface, that is your CLI. Then during authorization, AWS uses values from the request context to check for policies that apply to the request. It then uses the policies to determine whether to allow or deny the request. Guys, what is root user in AWS? Root user is also called account owner, most powerful user in AWS. Root user has the complete access to all AWS services. That identity is called root user. Most powerful user, guys. When you create an account, then account owner is a root user. And the best practice is create admin user and then through admin user perform all the tasks like creating roles, creating EC2 instance, etc. So admin user runs the account. And the best practice is to not use root user for your day-to-day activities in AWS. Now what are we going to learn using hands-on? Guys, now let's talk about key pillars of IAM. First, users. What is user? An IAM user is a person or service that needs access to your AWS account. Second, policies. Third, roles. And fourth, groups. Now let's talk about IAM identities. So guys, users, groups, role, these all are identities. Here, two or more users form a group. And for now, you just remember role is an identity and we'll study about it little later. Without attaching policy, IAM identities, whether it is user, your group or your role, can't perform any action. It means once you attach the policy to a user, role or group, then only they can perform any action. So this is all about IAM identities and root users. Guys, in next session, we'll talk about policies and different scenarios. Till then, bye-bye.